Hi, my name is Jack Robinson,
I'm Lucas Falley.
And I'm Micah Heimson.
and our presentation is on wetlands and estuaries. What is a wetland? A wetland consists of marshes or swamps and are all saturated lands. So there's a layer of water typically with lots of reeds and very dense wildlife. There's different types of wetlands. There's tidal wetlands, which are near the ocean, and it's pretty difficult to survive here because of the clashing of fresh water and salt water. And there's also non-tidal wetlands, which are marshes and meadows, which are normally located near lakes or inland. What is an estuary? The estuary is the tidal mouth of a large river where the tide of the ocean meets the stream. And here at the estuaries, there's a mixture of saltwater and freshwater, which makes it difficult for different types of fish and other marine life to survive. It is home to shallow open waters, freshwater and saltwater marshes, swamps, sandy beaches, mud and sand flats, rocky shores, oyster reefs, mangrove forests, river deltas, tide pools, and seagrass beds. So it is home to a lot of diverse life, but it is very difficult for certain species to survive here.
Here we have an example of a sample food web for wetland or estuary, and on it we have the increasing trophic level, starting with the autotrophs of the algae and various aquatic plants. And one path that energy takes in this food web is the algae is eaten by small fish, which are then eaten by larger fish, such as bass, which can then be eaten by pelicans or the osprey or other predatory birds. And on this food web, it's a very diverse food web with a lot of interconnected animals, some that live primarily on land, some that live primarily in the water, and it just shows the interesting dynamic that the wetland biome has with all these different species living in such close proximity, with unique species that are found nowhere else, such as the manatee or sea cow, and you have leeches, river otters, and some more common animals such as raccoons or possums.
Competition in wetlands. Competition is the interaction between organisms in which both are harmed, typically as a result of limited resource or resources. Referring back to the food web, osprey and pelicans both compete for small fish, and because of this competition between secondary consumers, this results in only the most fit of the species to survive. Although this is just one example, competition can be seen on all levels of the food web, anywhere from autotrophs to tertiary.
In the wetland and estuary environment, there are many examples of predation as well. Predation is the capture and consumption of prey by a predator, and specifically in wetlands, there are many examples of this, including an alligator catching a catfish, or you have an osprey catching a larger bass fish, and you have just many examples of the larger animals typically eating the smaller animals, which passes energy up the trophic levels, creating an energy transfer between the animals of the wetlands. In the higher trophic levels, energy decreases as it moves up because it is lost as heat into the environment.
Mutualism in wetlands. Mutualism is the relationship when both organisms benefit. One example in the food web would be when alligators allow small birds to clean the dirty things out of their mouths. This is a mutualistic relationship because the birds get its food while the crocodiles get its mouth cleaned. Another great example that is not presented in our food web is when the red-bill oxpecker bird that rides around on the backs of cattle and other big animals picks off the ecoparasites that rest within their furry coats. The bird benefits by getting its food source, and the cattle benefits because it is not affected by the ecoparasites, so both organisms benefit. Commensalism and wetlands. Commensalism is a relationship when one organism benefits while the other is unaffected. One example of this is the gopher tortoise. This species digs many burrow holes in order for its survival. However, after it leaves these holes, it provides shelter for other species, such as the gopher frog. Because the gopher frog benefits from this new shelter, but the tortoise doesn't, it is considered a commensalism relationship. Parasitism in wetlands. This example follows the leech. Wetland leeches are predatory, feeding on a variety of invertebrates such as worms, snails, insect larvae, and crustaceans. However, some are also parasitic blood-seeking leeches, feeding on the blood of other species. These blood-feeding leeches attain to their hosts and remain there until they become full, at which point they fall off to digest. Because the interaction between the two species only benefits the leech at the expense of the other, it is considered a parasitism relationship. Leeches, however, also provide values to the ecosystem. They oftentimes serve as both a predator and prey, depending on the food web relationship. As seen in our food web, Leeches can be parasites to raccoons, but also food to frog species.
The first pattern of dispersion is random dispersion. And in random dispersion in the wetland or estuary biome, aquatic plants, such as sawgrass and mangrove trees, have their seeds distributed randomly by the water or wind. And wherever these seeds land, the plants then proceed to grow, which creates, when the pattern is examined, no clear pattern leading to this random distribution. The second pattern of dispersion in the wetland and estuaries biome is uniform dispersion. And in uniform dispersion, members of a species and a population are evenly spread out throughout the biome. And in our biome, this example would be alligators, as males and females live solitary lives with their set territories, leading them to be spread out along the biome in these very defined territories, creating a pattern of uniform dispersion evenly throughout the biome. The final pattern of dispersion in biomes is clump dispersion, and in wetlands and estuaries, this occurs among primarily small fish, such as minnows, which live in schools. When these fish are examined in order to determine the population pattern, what appears is that there are clumps of some animals, but then there are no members of the species in other areas, leading to the pattern of clump dispersion.
An example of a survivorship curve in the estuary and wetland environment would be that of the osprey. The osprey represents a type 2 survivorship curve because the individuals die out at a relatively constant rate, whereas compared to a type 1 survivorship rate where most die out towards the end of the life versus a type 3 survivorship curve where most die out at the beginning of the life, the osprey remains at a constant. Therefore, it represents a type 2 survivorship curve. In the wetland environment, the biogeochemical process of the water cycle plays an essential role in creating and maintaining the habitat of the wetland. The water enters the wetland through streams in the ocean, which is taken up by the plants to undergo transpiration where it evaporates into the atmosphere. Once it is evaporated into the atmosphere, it can re-enter the wetlands through precipitation or re-entering through the streams. This constant cycle creates a lot of saturation and a very heavy and dense water environment for all of the creatures that live in the wetland and estuary environments. Another biogeochemical process that plays a critical role in the estuaries and wetlands is the nitrogen cycle. In the nitrogen cycle, bacteria take in nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it into ammonia, NH3. Once it is converted into NH3, it can be taken up by plants and made into organic compounds, which makes up the plants. Once the plants are eaten by animals, as it increases into the trophic levels, they can enter into different species and individuals for their own use in organic compounds. And as sedimentary rock is broken down in the wetlands, this can also release nitrogen into the soil, creating a very dense and nutritious soil. The third biogeochemical process that occurs in wetlands is the carbon cycle. It is estimated that wetlands and estuaries contain a third of the world's carbon in the soil, which makes it very nutrient rich and encourages a lot of plant life. Carbon is taken up into the plants by respiration, and when they die, it can be absorbed into the soil, further creating a nutrient-rich soil. The decomposers break down the carcasses of animals and return carbon back into the atmosphere, which keeps the carbon cycle going in these wetlands.
The final biogeochemical process that takes place in wetlands is the phosphorus cycle. Over time, rain and weathering cause rocks to release phosphate, which is then distributed in soils and water. Plants then take up this inorganic phosphate from the soil, and the plants may then be consumed by animals. Once in the animal, this phosphate is incorporated into organic molecules such as DNA. When the plant or animal dies, it decays, and the organic phosphate is returned to the soil. Within the soil, organic forms of phosphate can be made available to plants by bacteria that break down organic matter into inorganic forms of phosphorus. Phosphorus in the soil can also end up in waterways and eventually oceans. Once there, it can be incorporated into sediments over time. Wetlands as natural capital. Natural capital is the world stock of natural assets which include geology, soil, air, water, and all living things. It is from this natural capital that humans derive all wide range of services that make human life possible. California's wetlands have significant economic and environmental values, providing benefits such as water quality maintenance, flood and erosion reduction, prevention of saltwater intrusion, wildlife habitats, commercial fisheries, recreation purposes, and even carbon sequestration. Human disturbances. California has lost over 90% of its original wetlands, primarily due to agriculture growth, urban and rural development, and silviculture, which is the farming of trees. Currently, Los Angeles County's only wetland is the Bologna Wetlands, which is located between Marina del Rey and the Westchester Bluffs. The lands once comprised more than 2,000 acres of marshes, mudflats, salt pans, and sand dunes, but today they've been reduced to only 600 acres of habitat that are unfortunately highly altered and degraded. Heal the Bay and other organizations, as well as environmental protection agencies and regulations, have helped preserve these essential biomes, hopefully to save them in the future.